Welcome to my American History Notes, where I discuss things I've learned about American history with you. Sometimes conclusions I've drawn, conclusions you might not agree with, you might even be offended by. But my point is I'd like you to have your own conclusions from your own study of American history and look at this and investigate this stuff yourself. So, very interesting for me anyway. Today, we're going to finish up with the civil rights movement. I didn't do it justice, but I did give you some basics so you can research on your own. And I'm learning more and more. So, I'm going to do a civil rights timeline, finish up with some questions. So, let's begin today. And the first thing is May 17, 1954, the Supreme Court rules on the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, unanimously agreeing that segregation in public schools is unconstitutional. The ruling paves the way for large-scale desegregation. The decision overturns the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson ruling that sanctioned separate but equal segregation of the races, ruling that, quote, separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. It is a victory for NAACP attorney Thurgood Marshall, who will later return to the Supreme Court as the nation's first black justice. And then in August of 1955, 14-year-old Chicagoan Emmett Till is visiting family in Mississippi when he is kidnapped, brutally beaten, shot, and dumped in the Tallahatchie River for allegedly whistling at a white woman. Two white men, J.W. Milam and Roy Bryant, are arrested for murder and acquitted by an all-white jury. They later boast about committing the murder in a Look magazine interview. The case becomes a cause célèbre of the civil rights movement. On December 1st, Montgomery, Alabama NAACP member Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat at the front of the colored section of a bus to a white passenger, defying a Southern custom of the time. In response to her arrest, the Montgomery black community launches a bus boycott, which will last for more than a year until the buses are desegregated December 21st, 1956. As newly elected president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. is instrumental in leading the boycott. In January and February of 1957, Martin Luther King, Charles K. Steele, and Fred L. Shuttlesworth established a Southern Christian Leadership Conference, of which King is made the first president. The SCLC becomes a major force in organizing the civil rights movement and bases its principles on nonviolence and civil disobedience. According to King, it is essential that the civil rights movement not sink to the level of the racists and hate mongers who oppose them. Quote, we must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline, he urges. In September of 57, in Little Rock, Arkansas, formerly all-white Central High School teams that integration learns that integration is easier, said than done. 9 black students are blocked from entering the school on the orders of Governor Orville Faubus. President Eisenhower sends federal troops and the National Guard to intervene on behalf of the students, who became known as the Little Rock Nine. On February 1st, 1960, in Greensboro, North Carolina, 4 black students from North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College began a sit-in at a segregated Woolworths lunch counter. Although they are refused service, they are allowed to stay at the counter. The event triggers many similar nonviolent protests throughout the South. 6 months later, the original 4 protesters are served lunch at the same Woolworths counter. Student sit-ins will be effective throughout the Deep South, integrating parks, swimming pools, theaters, libraries, and other public facilities. In April of 1960, in Raleigh, North Carolina, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, is founded at Shaw University, providing young blacks with a place in the civil rights movement. The SNCC later grows into a more radical organization, especially under the leadership of Stokely Carmichael. That's from 1966 to 67. In May 4th of 61, over the spring and summer, student volunteers began taking bus trips through the South to test out new laws that prohibit segregation in interstate travel facilities, which includes bus and railway stations. Several of the groups of, quote, freedom riders, as they're called, are attacked by angry mobs along the way. The program, sponsored by the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, involves more than 1,000 volunteers, black and white. In October of 1962, James Meredith becomes the first black student to enroll at the University of Mississippi. Violence and riots surrounding the incident caused President Kennedy to send 5,000 federal troops. On April 16th of 1963, Martin Luther King is arrested and jailed during anti-segregation protests in Birmingham, Alabama. He writes his important letter from Birmingham jail should read, arguing that individuals have the moral duty to disobey unjust laws. May of 1963, during civil rights protests in Birmingham, Alabama, Commissioner of Public Safety Eugene Bull Connor uses fire hoses and police dogs on black demonstrators. These images of brutality, which are televised and published widely, are instrumental in gaining sympathy for the civil rights movement around the world. On June 12th of 1963, in Jackson, Mississippi, Mississippi's NAACP field secretary, 37-year-old Medgar Evers, is murdered outside of his home. Brian Dilla Beckwith is tried twice in 1964, both trials resulting in hung juries. 30 years later, he is convicted of murdering Evers. August 28th, in Washington, D.C., about 200,000 people joined the March on Washington. Congregating at the Lincoln Memorial, participants listened as Martin Luther King delivers his famous I Have a Dream speech, and you should read it. September 15th, Birmingham, Alabama, 4 young girls, Denise McNair, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Addie Mae Collins, attending Sunday school, are killed when a bomb explodes at the 16th Street Baptist Church, a popular location for civil rights meetings. Riots erupt in Birmingham, leading to the deaths of 2 more black youths. In January 23rd of 1964, the 24th Amendment abolishes the poll tax, which originally had been instituted in 11 southern states after Reconstruction to make it difficult for poor blacks to vote. In the summer, the Council of Federated Organizations, COFO, a network of civil rights groups that includes CORE and SNCC, launches a massive effort to register black voters during what became known as Freedom Summer. It also sends delegates to the Democratic National Convention to protest and attempt to unseat the official all-white Mississippi contingent. On July 2nd of 1964, President Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the most sweeping civil rights legislation since Reconstruction. The Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination of all kinds based on race, color, religion, or national origin. The law also provides the federal government with the powers to enforce desegregation. On August 4th, 1964, in Neshoba County, Mississippi, the bodies of 3 civil rights workers, 2 white and 1 black, are found in an earthen dam 6 weeks into a federal investigation backed by President Johnson. James E. Chaney, 21, Andrew Goodman, 21, and Michael Schwimmer, 24, had been working to register black voters in Mississippi, and on June 21st had gone to investigate the burning of a black church. They were arrested by the police on speeding charges, incarcerated for several hours, and then released after dark into the hands of the Ku Klux Klan, who murdered them. On February 21st of 64, excuse me, in Harlem, Malcolm X, black nationalist and founder of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, is shot to death by members of the Black Muslims, which he had left and spoke against. He had abandoned Black Muslim United States for Orthodox Islam from a visit to Mecca, after a visit to Mecca. Malcolm X is a fascinating character with some very, very interesting sermons. I hope that you'll get a chance to listen or read some of them. March 7th of 65, I was February 21st of 65, I'm sorry, not 64. March 7th of 65, in Selma, Alabama, blacks begin a march to Montgomery in support of voting rights, but are stopped at the Pettus Bridge by a police blockade. 50 marchers are hospitalized after the police use tear gas, whips, and clubs against them. The incident is dubbed Bloody Sunday by the media. The march is considered the catalyst for pushing through the Voting Rights Act 5 months later. And August 10th, Congress passes the Voting Rights Act of 65, making it easier for Southern blacks to register to vote. Literacy tests, poll taxes, and other such requirements that were used to restrict black voting are made illegal. And in August, in Watts, California, race riots erupt in a black section of Los Angeles. September of 65, asserting that civil rights alone are not enough to remedy discrimination, President Johnson issues Executive Order 11246, which enforces affirmative action for the first time. It requires government contractors to take affirmative action toward prospective minority employees and all aspects of hiring and employment. Now, there's a lot more information. You can look up a timeline, go through the Black Panther, Stokely Carmichael, the Loving versus Virginia case that prohibited interracial marriage and how that was removed. When Martin Luther King is murdered in April of '68, and then different Supreme Court decisions. These are all available online if you're interested. I hope you are. And of course, the ringleader of the Mississippi Civil Rights murders in August of '64, Edgar Ray Killen, is convicted of manslaughter on the 41st anniversary of the crimes in June of 2005. So there's just a lot to go over. I'm not going to do it on a video. I'm hoping that what I'm saying will get you to want to look it up. So the struggle for honoring the promise of America's constitutional protection to all citizens has been a long and laborious one. The war for independence, the promise of Declaration of Independence has been an ongoing. America has been a work in progress. Racism is still endemic in America, and there's a great divide between the black and white regarding the position of each in relation to each other. There are many worthy areas of independent studies, such as the Tuskegee Airmen and others that I just don't have time to go over in this class, but other classes I can. And understand, I don't believe critical race theory is the way to address this. In critical race theory, they don't acknowledge that seeking rights under the Constitution is what you should be looking for. They look for the destruction of the system because they're Marxist, a communist. So when you're looking at the civil rights movement, you're seeing people who are fighting for the rights afforded to them, the rights that are theirs by God-given and by our Constitution. When you look at critical race theory, they're saying that won't matter. I read one critical race essay where they said it wouldn't matter if you got all your rights and there was nothing to keep you from having the rights promised to you, you'd still be oppressed under a racist system. So, because it's a class warfare for them. It's Marxism, it's communism. What they're looking for is a total destruction of the system, institutions, America to be torn to the ground and rebuilt. That is not what we need, and that is something we must fight. So let's go on and look at some. I'd like you to be able to name the famous Black orator and abolitionist spokesperson of the pre-Civil War era, name the Black educator and founder of the Tuskegee Institute, name the Black civil rights leader who gave the I Have a Dream speech in 1963, be able to say what does the abbreviation of NAACP, and what was the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, define lynching, and what city suffered race riots in 1992 after a Black person was beaten by police. I didn't go over that because it's so recent memory that I know you'll know people that remember it from television if they weren't there. So next we're going to discuss some famous Native Americans, some important ones politically, arts, different things, leadership. And so I hope that you'll stick with me on that. I hope you'll study the civil rights movement. It's a very important part of our history and something that we should know about. And I hate to see things being forgotten. I mean, I know people, Black and white, who have no knowledge of this stuff. They have some vague thing they've heard on the news, but they have no knowledge. They don't seem to care. This is a history, our history, American history, that we don't need to forget. Even if you don't want to get deep into it, you should have some general knowledge. You should know who Emmett Till was, or Martin Luther King, or Malcolm X, or Medgar Evers. You should know. You should have an idea. If you don't, I hope that you'll look into this. I hope you'll study. And I don't care if you don't agree with me. I mean, you can look at, you can say, well, I think you're crazy, you're wrong, fine, as long as you have an opinion. I really appreciate you listening, and I'll be talking about Native Americans next.